Saturday, the 25th day of April, and welcome to Back Porch Sports. Scott Hamilton and Ronnie Sanders here to chop up all things Southeastern Conference for the next 60 minutes, and only Southeastern Conference for the next hour. Ronnie, good morning. How are you?
I'm great. Good to be with you, Scott.
Glad to have you with me, sir. And it was actually an eventful week in the SEC, at least later in the week. We've got a pretty big tidbit to discuss here at the opening of the show. But first, I want to get into baseball. I want to give the lay of the land in college baseball. The Southeastern Conference position in the latest Division I rankings. 9 SEC teams ranked in the top 25. Number 4, Texas. Number 5, Georgia. At the top of that list, Arkansas falling from 16 to 24. Here's the big gainer. Ole Miss moving up from number 25 to number 17, and then Mississippi State from 17 to 15. So the Southeastern Conference continues to excel on the diamond as we get towards the end of the regular season, then eventually the NCAA tournament, and ultimately the College World Series. But that's not the big news item in SEC world this week. And this news dropped on Wednesday. And Ronnie, I cannot wait to get your take on this one. Alabama coach Kalen DeBoer getting a contract extension that will give him an additional $2.25 million a year through 2033. I'm kind of stunned, to be honest with you, because the last time I checked, this is a coach who lost the 2 most important games of the year, besides the Iron Bowl, by a combined 66-10, that being the SEC championship game to Georgia, and then, of course, that Rose Bowl drubbing to Indiana in the college football playoff. Now he's amongst the elite when it comes to pay in college football. What was your first impression when you saw he was getting a new deal?
It didn't really surprise me. He's won 10 games in his first 2 years at Alabama. And if you really look at who they could go get if they were to move on from him, there's not a guy that immediately jumps out at you like, a Rich Rodriguez when they hired Nick Saban or a Nick Saban. There's not a guy right now that jumps out at you. It didn't surprise me. The buyout number I don't believe is too egregious. If I remember, I read that correctly. So it didn't surprise me, but at the same point in time, the pressure is going to be on him. If you look at the number of coaches that Alabama went through between Bear Bryant and Saban, and how many guys left on their own, how many guys they fired, it's a tough job. And look, they've beaten Auburn, 6 years in a row now or something like that. So as long as that continues, then he'll be fine. But as soon as he loses that game and Tennessee in the same year, good luck.
I'm of a different train of thought. I think this was questionable at best, ridiculous at worst. This is an extension. He had 2 years left on his deal, by the way. This is a coach who has failed to live up to the standard of Saban, and nobody's going to do that. Let's make that clear. But losing to Florida State out of the gate by 14 when you're a 13.5-point favorite, getting embarrassed on a national stage. And Ronnie, here are 5 wins that Alabama had last year. Kent State, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, Auburn, of course, and A&M. Oh, East Texas A&M, by the way. That's who they beat. I was absolutely stunned to see this take place. And you talk about the buyout. If things were to absolutely go sideways this year with Alabama, it would cost them $67.5 million.
I read that then, Scott.
Pardon?
I misread that. So that's pretty egregious.
Well, and it's normally going to be like that, though, because it's the first year of a new deal. You're going to have a higher buyout. But if it goes sideways, they're going to put themselves behind the 8 ball. So they're not going to fire him, presumably, if it really falls off the rails this year. It drops to $56 million. Well, it's $67.5 in 2027, $56.25 million in 2028, down to $45 million. Wow, that's something. That's a bargain in 2029. I don't think it's a good move, because we see more and more universities get hamstrung by these extensions. Florida State with Mike Norvell when they had the undefeated season a few years ago. Undefeated season, by the way, which might have warranted an extension. They are trapped with Mike Norvell because of that. I think about all these other instances of schools we're going to give them an extension, and it ends up biting them in the rear end. I would have let at least one more season play out. Maybe that's the way I should frame it.
Well, a couple of different things. Number one, I agree with you. I wouldn't have done the extension. I didn't say it was a good idea. I said it didn't surprise me. So I wouldn't have done it either. But that being said, like I say, it doesn't shock me that they gave it to him. He's going to be under pressure regardless of what the contract is. It's a tough job. It's a great job. You can win a bunch of games there. You can win championships. But at the end of the day, you can't get blown out by Indiana in the playoff, and you can't get blown out by Georgia in the SEC championship game, and you certainly can't start losing to Auburn and Tennessee regularly.
You can't. You can't. By the way, I was kidding about the schedule earlier. They really didn't beat East Texas A&M, but it seemed like it. And I read that in one of the columns. I think it was written by Matt Hayes in USA Today. It actually felt like that was the quality of opponent they were getting victories from rather than going out and beating the best of the best. Now, they did have a 24-21 win over Georgia. They did beat Vanderbilt, but only after losing to Vanderbilt for the first time in, 50, 60 years. It seems like forever. I think they've put themselves behind the eight ball in this situation. And kind of to your point, who do you go get? I think that speaks volumes that they're even considering that, if that's their thinking at this point in time. Again, this is what, his fourth year, I believe, as the head coach.
His third.
Third year as the head coach. I'm shocked because Greg Byrne usually pretty prudent. I think this is foolish.
Well, he also gave Nate Oates a big extension. I think Nate Oates is making over $7 million a year.
But Nate Oates he's elevated Alabama basketball to a level that we've never really seen.
This is true. Like I say, though, Alabama it didn't shock me. But that being said, Alabama's not A&M, and there's not an unlimited amount of money. And they have money, but it's not unlimited. And so, can they afford that buyout if they need to? And, they probably can, but it will be extremely painful.
Extremely painful and embarrassing if it comes to that point. I think that's grounds for termination. I think about Scott Woodward at LSU, and I know the dysfunction of Louisiana State University is its own separate thing. You can't really compare it to anything else.
But he did
the same thing. About he did, but he was able to leave on his own accord. But it bit him in the rear end when he got to LSU because he had brought Brian Kelly in for that exorbitant salary, and it ended up being grounds for termination. Had he stuck around A&M, would they have fired him? Probably. Will Greg Byrne face the same fate? That's again presuming that the wheels fall off.
Oh,
I'm not. Go ahead.
They're going to. It's just a matter of time.
You see that happening?
Oh, absolutely. Because the pressure of the job. If you look when Bear Bryant retired, you had Ray Perkins that lasted, I think, 4 years. Went to the NFL and at that point in time, the Tampa Bay job was not considered a great job. It was an expansion franchise. So he takes that job, leaves the Giants job to go to Alabama. Then you have Bill Curry, who won the conference championship in his last year, won 10 games, and is ranked number 2 in the country, loses to Auburn, and gets a brick thrown through his window and leaves to go to Kentucky. And then you've got, you go from Franchione to, you got Gene Stallings after that, and then you got Franchione and DuBose and Mike Shula and on and on. And so it's a meat grinder of a job. And I've been there twice. I was with Terry Bowden at Auburn, and he replaced Pat Dye, and was with Ron Zook his first year at Florida for 3 years. And we replaced Spurrier, and there was fire Ron Zook up by the time we got through with the press conference. And so it's hard. Now Kalen DeBoer has more support than we did. But I'm not sure how much more.
You never want to be the guy to replace the guy. You want to be the guy that replaces the guy who replaces the guy. You know what? We recently saw it at North Carolina basketball with Hubert Davis. Same thing. He replaced Roy Williams. It didn't work out. Now they've got another coach. Alabama football, and you grew up in that state. You've been around the program. You've been in that world. I can't imagine what Kalen DeBoer deals with on a day-to-day basis because, first of all, he's not from the South. He's definitely not from Alabama. And he's just operated differently throughout the entirety of his professional life. I wonder what he does to compartmentalize the pressure because it doesn't end. And he hears day in and day out, and his family does as well. You're not Nick Saban. You're not Bear Bryant. You're not even Gene Stallings.
Well, and I hear it from my family, and like you said, you don't want to be and my family grew up here, and my dad, a lifelong Alabama fan, and he hates him, um, you know, and but you never want to be the guy after the guy. But like Ron Zook said when we got to Florida, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? Turn it down? But Kalen DeBoer was not in that situation. He had just played. He was in the playoff, played for a national championship at Washington. He didn't have to take the Alabama job. I mean, so that's a choice he made. And then look, I mean, he had interest from Penn State last year, had interest from Michigan, chose not to pursue it. But look who Michigan ended up hiring. They hire a guy that spent his entire career at Utah.
I think that's a wonderful hire.
So do I.
I was so optimistic about that. But why would you leave? Why would you leave something like Washington? That's a Big Ten school. Washington has some resources. You've already shown you can cook there. I mean, it has to be some kind of personal drive, goal, demon making you take a job like that. I mean, why would you leave a situation where you're really comfortable?
Well, I think a couple of reasons. Number one, you want the chance to compete at the highest level. The SEC is the highest level. Number two, can you really win a national championship at Washington? Do they have the resources? And you can't build a roster at Washington the way that you can build one in the Southeastern Conference, certainly at a place like Alabama. So I think that was part of it. But again, there are a lot of jobs that he could have gotten and a lot of jobs he could have taken. I'm just not sure why you choose to replace Nick Saban.
I'm not going to necessarily disagree with you on that, but all I'll say is I'm with you to a certain extent, but what's happened at Indiana has flipped my mind, flipped my thinking that I think it's possible anywhere now. Definitely somewhere like Washington where you have all those tech companies and Starbucks. You got Starbucks money able to go out and build rosters. So I'm not going to say it's outside the realm of possibility, but yeah, to your point, it's a lot easier when you put that Alabama A out there and you go into a recruit's house or you go to a donor's function and say, hey, I need another $1 million. And speaking of tough situations and flips and this, that, and the other, Vanderbilt, in the midst of its greatest run, arguably, in school history, coming off the first 10-win season in school history, also sent a dude to the Heisman Trophy ceremony, Diego Pavia, and we'll litigate how he behaved up there at another time. But today we've got Clark Lea, the head football coach at the Vanderbilt Commodores, coming aboard. He's going to join us at the bottom of the hour, and I want to get his take on what it has been like to see this transformation of Vanderbilt football. Remember, he's a Nashville native, played at Vanderbilt. Did he ever in his wildest dreams think that Vanderbilt would be possibly positioned for a college football playoff berth as it was last year? And also, how does he sell this new product to recruits who have only known Vanderbilt to be good? Wrap your mind around that. He's Ronnie Sanders. I'm Scott Hamilton. It's Back Porch Sports. Welcome back. It's Back Porch Sports, presented by Duck Club Bourbon. Ronnie Sanders and Scott Hamilton here. We've got Clark Lea, head coach of the Vanderbilt Commodores, coming up in about 15 minutes. We're going to get his take on what it's like to captain this, I don't want to say resurgence of Vanderbilt football, but because it's not resurging from anything really. It's just a whole new age that they've never experienced before. What's happening in Nashville. We're going to get Clark Lea's thoughts on that. Ronnie, I want to get your thoughts on this first, though. Interesting bit of news popping up with regards to scheduling and spring practice and all that. First and foremost, the NCAA is suggesting that the start of the college football season be moved up to 1 week. That means week 0 would now be week 1, and what we call week 0 would be moved up even earlier. As a former coach, agent, and all that, what are your thoughts on having the season moved up?
I think it's a good idea with the longer season now and the expanded playoff up to 12 teams and probably going to 16 teams soon. I think it's a good idea. You get a second off week, and it helps you with injuries. It keeps your team healthy, mentally, physically, and I think it's a pretty good idea. It probably needs to be implemented.
Yeah, and we both know that, of course, safety is one of the considerations with regards to all this, and no doubt one of the driving forces getting that second bye week. But who are we kidding? It's all about the playoff. It's all about expanding the window for the college football playoff. They still, though, insist that it will end on that first Friday or so, first weekend of December, and then they move everything up because they've had that extra bye week, perhaps, and that'll be the rationale behind moving the playoff up. I just know this. That time period between conference championship weekend and the first round of the 12-team playoff, it seems like it takes forever.
Yes.
I don't understand. What is it, 10 days, 2 weeks almost, really, it seems like. I say move it on up. The rub with all this, the complication is Army-Navy. They insist on, Army and Navy, insist on having a standalone day. At what point do we pivot and say, look, we got to play it when we play it. Everybody still celebrates the game, but there's a lot of other things going on.
Yeah, I mean, look, everything is about the playoff, and the executive order that the president signed regarding Army Navy. I'm not, I'm not. That's not a law. So that's neither here nor there. But I think eventually everything is going to change. I mean, it's changing now. College football is changing every day, changing every week, seemingly. So nothing is static, and I think there's going to be more realignment. So everything is in play. The portal window, everything is going to change.
I'm really happy, and that's one of the questions we're going to have for Clark Lea when he comes aboard at the bottom of the hour. I was so happy they went to the one portal window, and that was something we discussed last week, just how it made it so much easier to maintain roster continuity, because when you had those two windows in the spring, winter and spring, guys could be ticked off during spring practice, go elsewhere if they weren't happy with where they were on the depth chart. Now coaches know that the roster they have in the spring is presumably going to be the roster they have in the fall. That's significant. But here's something else, and we're talking about schedule tweaks. There's a push to alter spring practice to look more like OTAs in the NFL, official team activities. What would happen would be college football, would add 5 non-contact workouts during this period, which could go from January all the way to June, kind of mirroring the NFL calendar. My first impression, Ronnie, and I want to get yours, my first impression when I heard this is, duh, it's about time, because the 20-hour rule where you can only have 20 hours of working out and team activities and all that for student athletes, that was always a joke, man. That was always a joke. You bust out 20 hours by Wednesday.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, we were in different places. The players had to sign their time sheets and certify that they only spent 20 hours, and they always spent more than 20 hours.
You might as well hold a gun to their head. Are you going to sign this? No, I mean, it was. I mean, think about workouts alone, how long that takes. I mean, and that's what spring is supposed to be focused on. It's just, it's the smart. I like it, first of all, because it's going to allow for more individual instruction. My only regret is that this will essentially eliminate spring games, a critical touch point for fans and boosters.
Yeah, and it gives fans a chance to get back on campus during spring, and at least some of them. I think a lot of these spring games now are not. I think Nick Saban's first spring they sold out. Bryant Denny, I think. So there are some exceptions, but typically the spring games don't draw a ton. But it is a chance for fans and alumni who want to get back on campus in the spring to do that.
Well, it's important because it gives people excitement for football. We're in that period where we're halfway between the end of the previous regular season, the start of the next regular season. Allows people an opportunity to come together and celebrate a day, to pretend it's like a fall Saturday. Also a good opportunity to kind of get to see some of the guys that you're hearing about, some of the, or the guys we already know. Oh, well, Johnny added 20 pounds, or look how much faster Don is, and all that. But not having a spring game, though, is the best thing to a coach's ears, because there's no film, no video of guys playing. And it's kind of funny, Ronnie. Remember the proliferation before the transfer portal where having your spring game on television was such a big deal? Teams were using it as a recruiting tool and saying, they were basically 1 and 2 hour long infomercials. Alabama's A game. There's Saban in a pink suit and parading the sideline. And it was basically an infomercial for Alabama football. Now they don't want that. because other teams can poach and say, oh, well, look who they had second string linebacker. I bet he could play first string for us. He's probably ticked off with the amount of minutes he's getting. We should go reach out to that dude.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and they don't want the film out there on the players. And the other thing you mentioned, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it gives fans the chance to get back on campus. Spring games do, and I think that's more important now probably than ever because there's so many new players on each roster. You turn around and it's not 25 new guys anymore. It's a lot of times it's over half your roster turning over. So it gives the fans a chance to get back on campus and get familiar with the new players and get excited about the season.
Does it really give players a break, though? Because I always just felt like it was another scrimmage. I mean, we would go through and you go through the drills and you have these little mini workout scrimmages during spring ball, and then you have the ultimate spring game. But it still didn't feel like that big of a deal to me. It was because you're hitting the same dudes that you had hit for the previous 3.5 weeks. The jerseys are the same. You have one team's in dark, one team's in white. I just never felt like it was a big deal. I was always glad when it was over. When you were coaching, how did the players respond to you when it came to spring games?
We dumbed it down. We didn't want to show anything that might, especially when we were on TV. You didn't want to show anything that an opponent might use. And now, obviously, we talked about you don't want to use anything that somebody can use to go poach your players. So, it's it's an interesting time in college football.
One of the proposals that I've seen people try to make, and I don't think it ever has a chance of happening, though I wish it really would be moving the FCS games to the spring. And you would have an FCS team play at an FBS team, presumably a Power 4 team, in lieu of a spring game, and there would be some kind of revenue share and all that. I like the idea in theory because I think it would be great for both sides, especially the FCS school, because the revenue from those games is so important. Those guarantee games fund entire athletic departments, not just football programs for many of those schools. But I don't see it happening because then you would actually need a game day-like environment under game-type structure, and coaches can't control all of that. And coaches, as you know as well as anybody, are control freaks. And anytime you get into that situation, there are going to be variables they can't control. Somebody gets hurt, they're out for the following season when it really counts. But it would be a dream of mine. It's pie in the sky, I know. Ronnie, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't see it ever happening, but at the same point in time, it'd be nice to go out and have a real scrimmage, give the fans something to watch. And typically, you don't have a lot of App States and Michigans playing. I don't know if people remember that App State upset Michigan a few years ago in the Big House. But it would be I think it'd be fun for the fans.
What about like in the NFL, and we're talking about OTAs? What about shared practices where teams work out together? Again, do we get into? I mean, you could control that environment a little more. It could be just a straight workout, and there would be a lot of excitement. I have to think.
I would think, depending on who you're scrimmaging against or practicing against, the coaches you're going against may try to go poach your team.
That's true too. You get an up close look at
Especially
those guys who might.
especially if you're coaching against Lane Kiffin.
Well, we'll litigate that another time. Once more, it's just a different period right now. Transfer portal has changed everything, but having that one transfer portal window in January has been significant with regards to building rosters. And once more, that's going to be one of the topics I asked Clark Lea, head coach at Vanderbilt University, when he joins us on the other side. Going to get his take on what it's like to now only have one transfer portal window, and also get his take on just how arduous, how tough, how difficult it's going to be in the Southeastern Conference now that they are playing 9 conference games. Remember, there are no Vanderbilts anymore. Vanderbilt's not even Vanderbilt. I want to get Clark Lea's reaction to that very comment. He's Ronnie Sanders. I'm Scott Hamilton. You're listening to Back Porch Sports. We're still about 129 days away from the start of the college football season, but still so many things to look forward to, so many things to chop up. And one of the things that's kept my attention and the attention of a lot of football fans has been the remarkable transformation of Vanderbilt football. Vanderbilt in the midst of an incredible period right now, coming off the first 10-win season in school history. We're going to talk to the architect of that. He's entering his 6th season as the head coach of the Commodores. He's joining us now in the Duncan Williams Asset Management Hotline. Clark Lea, welcome aboard.
Oh, good to be with you.
Clark, don't be offended, but I've got to say this. Ronnie Sanders and I were going over scheduling last week and talking about the SEC getting an extra conference game and all that. And I made this remark. There are no Vanderbilts on the schedule anymore. Vanderbilt's not even Vanderbilt anymore. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think that's a good thing, right? I think we've gotten this program to a point where at least we're going to be a tough out, but I think more than that, I think we're a tough and competitive football team. And it makes me feel good. Obviously we want to distance ourselves as best we can from kind of the old mantras that surrounded our program. And I think the more that we can continue to build on the progress we made and chase the success that we want, I think in short time here, forgotten will be the lean years, and Vanderbilt will be known as a football powerhouse. That's the goal, and we're a couple of recruiting cycles away if we can keep this momentum going, where high school seniors will only have known Vanderbilt as a winner in their time in high school. That's pretty cool, and it's representative of the work we're doing. So I appreciate the comment because it shows the progress.
Well, and it kind of leads me to this next point about pitching Vanderbilt football now, as opposed to when you took the job a few years ago in 2021. You can now go into living rooms and you can look at kids and say, hey, this is what we've done. This is where we're headed. You could be a part of this. And it's not so much about being a foundation anymore, though, Clark. I mean, you've established the foundation. Now you can help accelerate that. Is that kind of the mindset? I guess the point is this. Your first group of recruits, you were telling them we're trying to build something. Well, you've already started building. Now these guys can help add floors.
Yeah, there's proof of concept. I think we're in conversations with more people than we were, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I mean, just more people are picking up the call, more people are showing up on campus. And we have to be careful. This is still going to be about the human beings we bring in this program. I mean, it takes a certain chip on the shoulder. We talk about being a team of misfits. We don't want to lose that edge. So there's still a lot of places that can out stadium us and out facility us, and that they can play a prettier brand of football. And, you can get more Twitter followers if you go somewhere else. This is still a place where you need to roll your sleeves up and go to work. We just have a proof of concept to say, hey, what we're actually doing here is working. We believe in the alchemy of team. We believe that ultimately we're more than the sum of our parts. And that's because we have the right people in this program that are building the relationships and the connections that are amplifying our environment and leading to the results we want. I want to keep elevating the level of player we're bringing into this program, but I never want to lose the mentality of a chip on the shoulder, kind of prove it attitude. And those that are entering the program now are looking to elevate the foundation that we've started here, and ultimately win a national championship, win an SEC championship, knowing that it's their signature that's going to be on those trophies. They're not inheriting success from anybody else.
Did you imagine this when you were playing there?
I did. I mean, I thought about. I knew I wasn't going to be an NFL coach, or an NFL player, because I knew that I wasn't good enough, and I'm grateful for that level of awareness. But when I knew I was getting into coaching, I wanted to be a head coach. I had thoughts about what it would be like to be the head coach at Vanderbilt. I had no idea what that actually meant. I had a ton of respect for the staff that we had here, and I enjoyed the way they operated. And it seemed like something that would be fun to come home and to build a program at your alma mater. And yet, 15 years out in the world, a lot had changed by the time, I was prepared for a head coaching job. And it just so happened that this was the one that was open when the arc of my career was allowing me to have opportunities. So I envisioned it. I think enough time had passed from my playing days to where I just wanted to have an opportunity to be a head coach somewhere, and I wanted to do it successfully. And there were certain things that I wanted that to look like, and the way the team plays and the way the team interacts. To do it here has been it's been really hard, and I think for as high as the highs are, the lows are really painful, but it feels really good to be on this side of the results. And I'm excited. There is obviously a real personal connection here. And, a few years ago, that was really causing a lot of angst for me. Now it's about how do I get this program sustained and stabilized and replicating success and elevating success. And then ultimately, I want to see it long term beyond where I can take it, have great success too. So that kind of becomes the focus now that we're on the right side of the results.
You and I were talking a little bit before you came on about your time at Wake Forest and working for Dave Clawson. And I've known Dave for a long time. And the thing that blew me away about Dave, I remember when he took the Wake Forest job, I was just astounded by how detail oriented he was and how the devil was in the details for everything in that program. And he would tell me the story about a 45-minute staff meeting just on how to hold the football and how to coach holding the football, the exact terminology to use in that so that there was no miscommunication whatsoever from the top to the bottom. What kind of lessons did you learn from Dave Clawson, and how has that helped you with this transformation of Vanderbilt football? Because in a lot of ways, Clark, it emulates what he did at Wake Forest.
Sure. So Dave, I worked for Dave twice. I worked 1 year at Bowling Green, 1 year at Wake Forest. And I have such respect and admiration for him. What you're talking about, here's a man who is maniacal in the details, who knew how to hold people accountable, was really smart in the way he designed systems. And it was an example of putting structure in place that in time leads to results. It wasn't about any one speech or any one point of motivation. It was like, we're going to be really sound in our systems, really smart in how we design this. And we're going to build it out in a way that it in time becomes a powerhouse. And that's what he did at BG, and that's what he did at Wake Forest. He's also a friend of mine, so he's a guy that I can call on. In fact, I'll never forget in 2021, we took one on the chin here at home against Georgia. It's probably the worst game I've ever been a part of. And I was kind of knocked sideways after that. And it was a little bit this feeling that realizing the magnitude of the task coming out of that game. And we just were never competitive even before the game started. So I remember going home, and it was like a mid-afternoon game. So I got home right as the sun was going down. I went outside, sat down. At the time, we still didn't have furniture in our house. So I pulled a chair out, just like a folding chair, and I sat in it, and I called Dave Clawson, and it rang for half a ring, and he picked up immediately. And that led to like a 30-minute conversation on how I was feeling, not realizing that, hey, can I do this? What in your experience has felt the way I'm feeling right now? And Dave was so kind to encourage me, to make sure that I understood that this is exactly where I was supposed to be. And it wasn't about trying to create quick fixes. It was finding the guys that were aligned with the message of the program and amplifying and strengthening their voices, and staying methodical in approach and not getting emotional. I mean, I'll never forget that call, because that probably was one of my lowest moments. And hearing his voice and hearing his certainty about what happens on the back end of this, as long as we kind of stay the course and we pivot in the right ways. I got a ton of respect for Dave, but more than that, I appreciate him as a friend and a mentor.
Yeah, those kinds of relationships have to be critical, I guess, because it's a results-based business. And when you're starting off the way you were starting off, the results weren't happening. I can't imagine what you were dealing with. Just a couple more minutes with Vanderbilt coach Clark Lea. You can follow him on X @_Coach Lea. Clark, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a couple of actual important questions regarding the upcoming season. But first, I want to look back. What was it like this past spring, having only to deal with one transfer portal? I have to think that made your life a lot easier.
It did. I mean, look, I think more than anything, more than making life easy, it was just nice, I think, for everyone involved to know who your team was going to be. I mean, I think for our first meeting was January 11th, and we sat in a room with people that had signed up for a year of work together. And that's a really refreshing reality, where I think for the players too, it's like, they know who's going to be on their left and their right, and who's going to be in front of them. And I just feel like I think it's healthy for everyone. I think the chemistry you can build, the support systems you can build, the lack of chaos coming out of the spring. And I would not be being honest if I didn't say that we haven't been helped, from a team standpoint by that spring portal the last couple of years. But it was worth it to me to be able to say, this is our team for the year. Let's set sail here and make this as good as we can make it. Again, I think for the good of our game, a really positive move.
And my last question, Coach, 9-game SEC schedule now. You're stipulated to play one out-of-conference Power 4 opponent. How do you use that to motivate your team going forward? Because that's pretty challenging. And as I said to start this interview, there are no old Vanderbilts on the schedule now because Vanderbilt's not even Vanderbilt anymore.
Yeah, so we don't, our guys are. I don't need to motivate them with that. They're pretty motivated, and they come here to play against the best. And in a lot of ways, if they could play, 12 SEC games, they probably would. This is we enjoy that stage, the arenas, the competition, and I think adding the additional games great for college football. I think it gives fans another weekend to clear the schedule and get excited for SEC ball. And so sure, it adds layers and dynamics, obviously, with the A4 opponent as well. There's an additional game there that's going to be a challenge. This year we're playing NC State. What a cool opponent to play against, in a traditional, strong football program from a proud football state. So we're excited for that. I think, more than anything else right now, we're focused on us, and we know that there's going to be adversity ahead. That's true of any team that's in pursuit of greatness. You're going to find some obstacles along the way. We've got to anticipate that, look for those opportunities to grow through them, and just get excited about trying to, again, build upon the progress we've made. We're going to look different this year, which, is going to present certain challenges, but this is the fun part, man. It's like, when you're doing this, you're not guaranteed anything. You just kind of put all your chips on the table, and you got to figure it out as you go. And one thing I know is that we have a really good group of human beings, coaches, staff, and players. And it is an honor to take on a great challenge with people you care about. And that's what I get to do.
He's Clark Lea, head coach of the Vanderbilt Commodores. You can follow him on X at Coach_Lee. Coach, appreciate your time. I want to wish you the best of luck. Let's chat again soon, bub.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Good to be with you.
All righty, that's Clark Lea of the Vanderbilt Commodores joining us on the Duncan Williams Asset Management Hotline. Stick around, more Back Porch Sports on the other side. Welcome back. Back Porch Sports, presented by Duck Club Bourbon. Want to thank Clark Lea, head coach of Vanderbilt University, for joining us. He hopped aboard the Duncan Williams Asset Management Hotline. And his enthusiasm is contagious. It is. And you have to think that part of it is rooted in him being from Nashville, having played at Vanderbilt, but also knowing that everything that's happening with the Commodores right now has happened under his watch. It's absolutely incredible. And I mentioned it during the interview, Ronnie, how his time under Dave Clawson, both at Bowling Green and at Wake Forest, really gave him the insight on how to be detail-oriented, to focus on the little things, and they'll equate to big things. But it's kind of reminiscent of the whole Saban thing, the process. You worry about this one singular act, and then you worry about the next one. And I truly believe that if you follow that modus operandi, it's successful in any aspect of life. Any aspect of life. I read a book, and got a friend named John Talty. He's outstanding college football writer for CBS Sports. He wrote a book called The Leadership Secrets of Nick Saban a couple of years ago. I highly recommend it to everybody. And I gave it out as Christmas gifts, not because I'm a Nick Saban fan or an Alabama fan necessarily, but I found thinking of that way of Saban does business, the process, being detail-oriented, I found it to be so effective and influential in everything I did that I had to share it.
Yeah, and I was a graduate assistant for Nick Saban for a year at LSU, and everything he talked about was process. And the kids bought in, the coaches bought in, and it's obviously what he does works and what he preaches works. And there are a number of coaches out there who are trying to emulate him, and very few of them have had this. Obviously, have had success doing that.
If I were a CEO or anything in a leadership position, I would use his practices. I truly would. I mean, it's proof positive that it absolutely works. But I see it working at Vanderbilt, and it had to have been tempting for Clark Lea to get frustrated. It had to be, because this is a guy who's been brought to his alma mater. He's been tasked with flipping this program, not even flipping it. I mean, getting it going. And it wasn't easy. Check this out, Ronnie. 2-10, 5-7, 2-10. A lot of coaches would have been fired after that. Anywhere but Vanderbilt, the coach gets fired. But because he was an alum, and because Vanderbilt doesn't have the highest of expectations, at least before Clark Lea got there, he was given a longer leash. He flipped that to 7-6 and then 10-3 last year. It's absolutely remarkable. It's one of the best stories in the SEC this century.
There's no question. And Vandy, we all know what a graveyard job that's been. I mean, James Franklin was able to win enough after he got the schedule right, to get out. Another thing that Clark Lea has done is brought in Jerry Kill, who brought Diego Pavia with him. Jerry Kill is a savant. And so I think Clark deserves a lot of credit for bringing in that guy and letting him put his program in place.
Jerry Kill had been the head coach, correct me if I'm wrong, at Minnesota, and he had some health issues, had to step away. Then he ended up, was it New Mexico? Is that where they were? New Mexico State? Wherever Diego Pavia was.
Which is the worst job in America, outside of maybe
worst job in America. Well, and then, but Clark Lea has the foresight. See, and he had also been hired, though, to be an advisor at Virginia Tech under Justin Fuente. So people saw the value of having a Jerry Kill on staff. And when Clark Lea, and I'm remiss I didn't ask Clark Lea to clarify this, when Clark Lea reached out to Jerry Kill, wanting his counsel, wanting to bring him aboard in an advisory role, Jerry Kill had the smarts to say, okay, but I want to bring this guy with me. And it was Diego Pavia. And I guess, well, the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously we can talk about, we mentioned earlier that we can discuss Diego Pavia's behavior at the Heisman Trophy ceremony another time, but you can't argue with what kind of player he was for Vanderbilt and what kind of press he brought for Vanderbilt going to the Heisman ceremony. And it was all positive until right after the ceremony.
I had him, I think, second on my Heisman ballot. It might have been third. I had him on my ballot. You're allowed to vote 1, 2, and 3. I had Fernando Mendoza was far and away the Heisman winner in my eyes. I was turned off by the way Diego Pavia behaved in the moments after that. I felt it was very un-Heisman-like, and had he behaved like that prior to the ceremony, I would not have had him on my ballot. Absolutely would not have had him on my ballot. I actually didn't have Baker Mayfield on my ballot when he won, and I became the most hated man in Oklahoma. That was a whole deal. I have to tell you that story sometime. But I felt the way Baker Mayfield behaved was not Heisman-like. And if you go to the Heisman website, you'll see the criteria for determining the winner, who you should vote for. And the number one thing was class, sportsmanship, how you handle yourself. And taunting Kansas, planting the flag at WVU, flipping off Baylor fans, all the stuff that he was doing, I felt you never would have seen Roger Staubach do that. You never would have seen Barry Sanders do that. I could go on and on and on. But his talent on the field, though, his performance on the field was unassailable. What Diego Pavia did, handled himself great on the field. True football player, but his behavior at the Heisman ceremony, and to his credit, he apologized. He was remorseful.
Yeah, I give him credit. And look, everybody, if I was judged on what I did 30 years ago, probably wouldn't be very good, or 20 years ago, or whatever, So give him a break. He's a kid, he's 22, 23 years old. Well, maybe he's 25 now, which is the nature of college football these days. Clark Lea deserves a ton of credit, bringing in the right people and trying to do things the right way. And look, in college football, you brought it up earlier. In college football today, Indiana's got Mark Cuban, and all you need is one deep pocket booster, and you can go make a run. Look at what Texas Tech has done. It's not just Indiana.
I have to wonder. I have to wonder if the recent success of Vanderbilt is going to continue to snowball, though, because we all know that Vanderbilt is one of the best academic institutions in the country. Vanderbilt puts out a lot of high performing professionals, politicians, community leaders, so on and so forth. But I wonder how many of them are actually coming together now and saying, you know what? They've got a lot going on down there. We need to invest back into the program. The facilities are much better. I've been there since the stadium was improved, and I was one of the people that was laughing at them because remember when they had the scoreboard hanging on the chains in the back of the end zone? That was just totally different now. It's actually a really awesome stadium, and it's got that cool downtown feel for Nashville. But I wonder, though, if this momentum is continuing and how it's looking with regards to getting donations. What's their NIL war chest look like? And are they going to continue to do things to improve the facilities? Because even when you get the facilities to a certain level, you got to do more because somebody else is doing more.
Yeah, they've done a great job getting facilities back, up to par. I shouldn't say back up to par. They've never been up to par.
No.
I remember when we played there when I was coaching, the dressing room was across the street, and it was not a very nice dressing room on top of that. But they've done a lot. They've done a wonderful job with the stadium, and yeah, it would be. I would like to know what kind of pockets, what kind of deep pockets they have as far as NIL goes, because the rest of the conference, you look at the top half of the conference, and you've got A&M and Texas who have basically unlimited resources, and then you've got the Floridas and the Tennessees and the Auburns and the and on in the rest of the conference. Those premier programs that certainly have deep pocketed boosters.
I'm looking at Vanderbilt's 2026 schedule right now. Austin Peay and Delaware. Then they've got NC State coming to Nashville on September 19th before a little trip to Auburn. So you might possibly have a 3-0 Vanderbilt team headed to Auburn on September 26th. No more Diego Pavia. He owned Auburn. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, he certainly did at New Mexico State and at Vanderbilt. Yeah, it should be a good game.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a tough stretch there. They go to Auburn, then they go to Georgia, then they get Ole Miss at home, Arkansas at home, at Kentucky, at Mississippi State, Alabama at home, at Florida, then UT in Nashville. And I have to think that the people on the other side of the state over in Knoxville are just chomping at the bit to have another shot at Vanderbilt because they didn't take that one too well last year when Vanderbilt beat them.
No, they didn't, and I can't imagine that many people around the conference are taking it well. But they won 10 games last year, and you have to give them credit.
Vanderbilt is no longer Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's not even Vanderbilt. I mean, that's the truest truism of them all. There are no Vanderbilts in the SEC anymore. Vanderbilt is not even Vanderbilt. And Clark Lea, to his credit, he took it well when I said that to him, and he understood completely what I meant, that there are no days off in the Southeastern Conference. I just hope that this 9-game conference schedule, while I'm all for it because I want to see all the SEC football I can, I'm hoping it doesn't bite the league in the rear end when it comes to the college football playoff. Hopefully they'll get that thing expanded sooner rather than later. Ronnie, we've only got a couple minutes left. Going to wrap this thing up. Do you have any thoughts on what you're keeping an eye on over the next week with regards to football? I know you're keeping a close eye on everything happening down in Auburn. What's one storyline going on down there that really has your attention?
Golish has really made an impression on the fan base. And, there was a lot of talk in the offseason last year about Hugh Freeze and the golf and him playing too much golf. And none of that matters if he goes out and wins 10 games last year. Instead, you've got a new head coach, and people seem to be really excited about Alex Golish. We've talked before about, I never thought that Auburn would hire a coach who was born in Russia, raised in New York, and graduated from Ohio State. But here we are. It's a new day in college football. And, we've talked about it before. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Vanderbilt, Missouri, they're out winning 10 games. And Auburn and Florida have been terrible for quite a while now, over half a decade.
Yeah, it is mind-blowing. All right, that's it for this edition of Back Porch Sports presented by Duck Club Bourbon. Next week, We got a friend of the program, Houston Nutt, former head coach at the University of Arkansas and at Ole Miss. He's going to come aboard. Want to get his take on everything going on in the world of college football, get his take on everything going on in the Southeastern Conference. How would Houston Nutt, if he were coaching today, how would he handle NIL? How would he handle revenue sharing and the transfer portal? We'll ask him next Saturday. He's Ronnie Sanders. I'm Scott Hamilton. Hey, hit me up on social media. You can follow me on X at Scott H Sports. Otherwise, until next Saturday, have a good one.